past few years in America, and even the world, we've seen a reckoning around racial justice, and also we've seen the centrality of cities in our world. We've learned that communities living side by side can have vastly different experiences of well-being, whether it's economic opportunities, exposure to violence, homelessness, impacts of climate change, and of course, things like COVID-19. Today, we want to explore how smart philanthropic partnerships with cities and local governments can be a way of addressing racial equity, as well as creating well-being for all residents. If there's one thread through this entire conference, it's that regardless of which issue area you all work on, understanding the interconnected nature of these key issues is vital. Before I launch in and introduce this illustrious panel, I do want to share with the attendees that we do have members of the media here today in this session. Heretofore, this event has been media free, so I wanted to share that piece. And I have the pleasure of introducing for our conversation first Andre Perry. Andre is Senior Fellow at Brookings Metro.
Thank you.
He's a scholar in residence at American University and a professor of practice of econ at Washington University. A nationally known and respected commentator on race, structural inequality, and education, Perry is the author of the book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. His research focuses on race and structural inequality, education, and economic inclusion. Next, John Legend is an artist and activist. He's made history as the first African-American man to join the prestigious EGOT Club. The acronym refers to winning the Grand Slam of all 4 major entertainment awards, an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. He has launched multiple nonprofit organizations, including the Show Me campaign, which aims to provide a quality education to every child and address systemic issues in the criminal justice system. And also Free America, which aims to end mass incarceration and work with local governments on issues such as health, criminal justice, education, and housing. Today we'll be talking about how he's partnered with Andre and multiple cities like Boston to expand the horizons of what's possible in terms of creating justice and human flourishing. And like me, he's a proud alumnus of Penn. Go Quakers.
Go Quakers.
And last but not least, Mayor Michelle Wu. She is the first woman and first person of color to be elected mayor of Boston. We are both daughters of Taiwanese immigrants, and Mayor Wu describes herself as a Boston Public Schools mom and a frequent rider and supporter of our subway system here called the T. She believes that the key to solving our deepest challenges lies in building community and embracing possibility. Her aspirations and many achievements so far include aligning Boston's climate, infrastructure, education, and investment strategies with Boston's values, laying the foundation for a greener and more efficient, more equitable city for generations to come. So thank you all so much for being here. I want to start my first question today for John. John, you've long been an advocate with a really prominent focus on education and mass incarceration, but I'm curious, what drew you specifically to city-led initiatives? Why cities?
Well, everything we work on, we were thinking about how people live, how to make people's lives better, how to make them more fair, more just, but actually also just how to make their experiences in the world better. And we talk a lot about well-being now and human flourishing and how to live a better life. And so much of the decision making that goes around how people live their lives happens on a local level. And so we decided to found Human Level. We did it in cooperation with Fuse Corps because the theory of our case was that so much of what affects people's everyday lives is being decided on a local level. And if we want to think about equity and how to make sure that people who've been traditionally underrepresented, marginalized, and left behind, how to improve their lives, we've got to affect what happens in their local communities. So, human level, we go into city government. We work in cooperation with mayors like Mayor Wu, and we say, hey, how can we help? How can we make the city more fair for all of its citizens? How can we make life better for all of its citizens? We think about housing, we think about access to transportation, access to local jobs, access to healthcare, all of the things that affect the way people live in their daily lives. It happens so much on the local level. We think about presidential politics and national politics a lot, and I think those are really important levers, and a lot of times it determines what kind of funding goes to the cities, it determines a lot of things, but once that money goes out, so many of the decisions that are made that really affect people's lives are made in the trenches, locally. And so we wanted to have a voice in those local decisions that was thinking about equity, thinking about how to make life better for all of the citizens of the community, and consider the people that are often left out of the conversation and left behind. And so not only does that mean placing fellows in those local government offices, but also being very intentional about listening to the community, listening to people on the ground, listening to activists, listening to people who have a stake, who may have been ignored before, and making sure their voices are heard when important decisions are being made about where this highway goes, where this transit stop is going to be, what the zoning rules are going to be around housing, and making sure we deal with our homelessness crisis, and making sure we think about how we invest in public safety versus other investments that will actually lead to more flourishing. So all of these decisions, so many of them are made on a local level, and we wanted to make sure we had a voice there.
Thank you. I think that that idea of listening is a perennial challenge for us in philanthropy, right? Brian Stevenson has said we have to get proximate. And I imagine that as a celebrity, it can be difficult to do that, but you have actually made that a top priority. What's the advice that you have for us? I mean, this is a challenge that we have. We want to get more proximate to the communities that we serve, and I'm curious, how have you thought about that?
Well, I mean, my advice is go local. In this instance, I think it really is about thinking locally, I mean, acting locally. You know, we talk about thinking globally and acting locally, and I think you actually have to do it. You actually have to talk to people, listen to them, and think about how you can make decisions that will make their lives better on a local level. And so many of the things we do from a kind of 10,000-foot level, and we think about, you know, measuring success from that level and all those things. And I understand that, and my analytical brain is like, yes, and my consultant brain is like, yes, that's great. But bottom line is, we have to talk to people. We have to touch them. We have to listen to their concerns. We have to hear what's going on in their lives. And that's why I love that Andre focuses so much on well-being and actually surveying people, and are they happy? Are they flourishing? Are they feeling fulfilled in their lives? Like, listen to them, and then think about policy in reaction to the feedback you're getting from them.
Thank you. So Andre, in your partnership with John, you have a cross-cutting focus on racial equity and well-being in particular. A lot of the funders here are working on one or more pieces related to well-being, so whether it's education, economic development, climate change. What do you see as the role for funders on increasing well-being in cities overall if they're just working on like one part of the puzzle?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sure when you were cheering when we first came out, it wasn't for me. But
he's a star. He's a star.
But hopefully I can provide you some delight and encouragement. Now, well-being, when people first hear it, they go, oh, this is a nebulous term that generally means how you're doing. But there's a lot of research behind this concept of well-being. All of you play a role in increasing it. Certainly housing matters, jobs matter, people's sense of belonging, and all of those things that are measured by standard socioeconomic metrics. So income, share of people who own their homes, all those fancy metrics that we typically use. But here's the issue, and we see it at a national, state, and local level. Many mayors, governors, presidents will tout what they're doing based upon those standard metrics. But people actually have different thoughts about how they relate to those metrics. So when you asked this question earlier to John, how are we reaching out? What WellBeing does is we're asking people, how do they feel? And what are the issues that are pertinent to them? Certainly there can be some overlap, and yes, in this partnership, we look at the standard measures around transportation, jobs, housing, life expectancy. But we're also going to ask people, what do you think is important in this moment of time? In addition, we're going, not to get too wonky, but we can look at well-being across place, race, and gender. So we'll be able to see how white, black, Latinx, Native American people are doing in different types of cities, both small, medium, and large. We certainly will be able to tease out those differerences. So for me, why this partnership is important is that, one, we're going to look at those basic metrics. Most people know me from housing and housing devaluation, and they love seeing those metrics. But now we'll be able to hear from people at the neighborhood level, what is making your life better and what is not. And that, from my perspective, that's what you want to know as a funder. Because then you'll be able to see how are we doing, not just on moving the needle on certain metrics that oftentimes you can gain, right? But you'll be able to determine if your money's well spent by gauging it on how people feel. So in general, that's why I'm excited about doing this work on well-being, because it really gets at people at a neighborhood level.
A follow-up question. So much of your work is around gathering this very good data, and in an earlier session, someone wisely lamented, oh, funders, you often want this data and you want it to be really robust, but nobody's paying for this, right? And so I'm curious, what does successful partnership with a researcher like you look like with Philanthropy?
Oh, what I bring to the dinner table is I have used data as the power of convening. Is that I can bring people together who would not necessarily come together. People hear a trusted researcher. I have the imprimatur of Brookings, and people come and we share data that people can ultimately use. Now, I do say this. I don't believe in the saying to be data-driven. I say be community-driven, use data as a way to make sure that we're moving towards some very basic principles of democracy, right? That people have the right to vote, that people are properly housed, that people can afford their energy, that can get to work, they can work and live in approximately the same time. We all want these things. So for me, what I think why this works is that we get the data, we have the power of convening, and we have people installed in city government. And I say this all the time because one of the issues around city governments is philanthropy in particular is like, oh, why should I work with city government? And regardless of what you think of city governments, you might think that they're part of the problem, but they're the undeniable part of the solution.
Yeah.
You cannot move these needles without being in partnership. So if you have intermediaries working in a way that's aligned with some very basic goals in city government, you can get a lot done. So hopefully that if you want to reach out, certainly you can do that. But that's how you work with us to make things happen in your city and neighborhood.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to having Mayor Wu join this conversation. So you have the unique vantage point of seeing and knowing what successful partnerships with your administration looks like. What is your advice to funders who want to be good partners to cities? And how would you answer doubters who point to the fact that many cities seem to be flush with federal funding of late? And what is the role that private philanthropy should play?
Well, first, I am incredibly honored to be here with this panel and with all of you, and just really grateful that Boston has a chance to convene this conversation. You're just a little bit of a snapshot of what a day in the life of a mayor looks like. I had 2 other events prior to this, starting the morning at Mass and Cass, what is the kind of colloquial name for the intersection area of our city where we see a concentration of homelessness, substance use, and mental health challenges, where as the winter is imminent, our teams are working to place one by one almost 100 individuals who've been living in encampments and tents in very unsafe conditions, and to do so in a way that is different from how maybe other cities around the country are trying with a similar challenge, but to really take a people and human-centered approach, understanding people's needs one by one, making the placements, providing transportation, shelter, storage for belongings, and then to go directly from checking in on that effort there to shoveling some dirt with the groundbreaking of Harvard University's Enterprise Research Campus, which will be a generational investment in how the life sciences and research happens. And then in between all of that, to be able to hold room for the daily needs that come in around potholes and schools and everything. And so it's a delight to be here and to know that there are so many willing and eager hearts and helping hands to be involved in this very consequential work right now. In terms of what philanthropists and funders should do to work with cities, just do everything that Andre and John are saying already. The impact truly is at the local level. I may be a little biased, but I really believe it's the proximity to people. It is the closeness and the density that breeds creativity, and cities are really where innovation and impact come to life on every issue, big and small. And especially now when we see so much hurt and conflict in the world and such fractured, painful times, the ability to zoom right down to what people are living every single day and make a difference every day, there's no other place you can have that immediacy of impact. I think what is most helpful maybe from a sort of municipal government perspective, we are flooded every day with the unexpected. Right? Some fire, it could be a literal fire that takes place, an unexpected situation that comes up, and we're responding and reacting so often that to have space and to have support, technical resources, financial resources, convening resources, to be able to say, let's just zoom out a little bit and think about proactively, how do we change the systems that you're working so hard every day just to keep going and to do more in, when in fact it might be slowing down to speed up, actually, the underlying foundation of what we need to do. We have a lot of great examples, and Fuse Corps, for example, that Human Level has been involved in, is partnering with the City of Boston, too. We have one of our amazing fellows is possible to have been working in the Mayor's Office of Housing with the city, and her project had been on thinking about the intersection of climate and housing, how to tackle that portion of our buildings that the property owners can't afford to make the retrofits. And so targeting smaller, multifamily, two-family, triple-decker homes that proliferate Boston's landscape, and thinking about how to do the retrofit program that's tailored to them. And now she's going to be, we are so grateful, she just accepted a full-time position, and we only were able to do this because of the partnership and introduction through philanthropy. We have lots of other examples, and there's some great partners in the room between Jim Canellis and Amos Hostetter and the Barr Foundation and so many others. We are looking to build an ecosystem that models what we need to see. So even within city government, getting City Hall out of City Hall into our communities, block by block, street by street, and then putting resources on our end to be the best partners that we can be. It's Stephen Chan, who is here, is our relatively new director of thinking about partnerships with all of the major anchor institutions in the city and how we can be moving in the same direction. Because cities also are not just crafting the policies, implementing, delivering on services, but we're often market participants as well. And when we can use our contracting dollars, our staffing and workforce development choices to line up with the goals of those funders and partners in every sector, that's how we change the entire system.
That's great. Could you address that maybe lingering doubt of, oh, but all this federal funding, do cities really need funding? How would
That's
you...
not a thing. Cities need funding. I'll give a couple examples. The ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan, once in a generation with federal funding coming to help with pandemic recovery. We were able, very lucky in Boston, that we didn't have to use the majority of our dollars to plug holes because we've had pretty diligent financial practices along the way, and so we really took the most advantage of these dollars for housing, for wealth building, for closing the racial wealth gap, education, and these dollars are slated to be committed by 2025 and spent by the end of 2026, and in the process of building real systemic change, that's a blink of the eye. So much of our focus has been how do we build infrastructure that is lasting rather than having dollars spent on something that then just evaporates and we're right back to square one. How do we test out and create proof points as to what works, innovations or maybe conversations that were a little bit risky to have politically or just to try it and to do that now. And we've seen so much success. For example, with our space program, I think Chief Sugun Idawu was in the House, who is our Director of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, helping entrepreneurs, not just saying, okay, we're going to give you some funding to sustain you, but how do we match you with those downtown and high traffic retail locations, so we're not just keeping Black and brown business owners in our Black and brown neighborhoods, but we see the representation of our city in all of the most high traffic and high revenue areas, downtown, the Seaport, Newbury Street. That's where our entrepreneurs of color should be. This is entirely with federal dollars, and we've been able to help a good portion. We are trying to stretch those dollars, but now that we've proved what's possible, built the systems for it, in many ways, those philanthropy dollars could go right into sustaining and expanding the impact.
That's great. I think funders, we can often see our own resources as being relatively limited vis-a-vis the government, but the needs do seem endless. I worry that this gap can make funders sit on the sidelines because they don't want to be approached to plug every single hole when they have their own priorities. So Mayor Vu, what would you say to a funder with this concern? Like, what is the kind of the ethos behind the partnerships? I've heard there's certainly a lot to be done on talent, which I want to come back to. But how would you advise someone who says, I have my priorities, I would love to get in touch, but I don't want to be called all the time whenever there's a new need? How would you answer that?
It's really a two-way street. In Boston, we're so lucky to have so many resources in our city, and I don't think over the years that city government had done the best job of being clear about how to partner. We hear a lot, help us with education, help us with climate change, but then you're not sure if it even resulted in much, and then there's always the next crisis to address. We're trying to really be specific about the programs that we're building, what the city is doing, where we're putting our own dollars, right, program by program, signature project by signature project, so that you could either plug in directly to those or help convene and think about shifting the entire ecosystem. And again, that's why we're investing in the staff resources on our end. So there's one single point of contact for anyone who is looking to partner with the city to ensure that we are streamlined, supported, and completely aligned.
Great.
Can I just
Yes,
add one point to this? When you're partnering with the city, that might sound like you're partnering with the city budget, but it also means you're partnering with intermediaries and organizations that are aligned with the city. And so for me, it is, you said something that's very critical. How can we invest in things that change systems? Because cities oftentimes don't have the luxury of working 5 years ahead. And so when you do make investments, you make investments in intermediaries around some evidence-based perspective ideas that may bear fruit down the road. Because oftentimes as mayors are just dealing what's right in front of them. And so if you can invest in ways that can show a new way forward, I'm biased here, but and if you can invest in things where you can link with other cities to learn what's working in other cities. Because oftentimes we're always focused on solving problems, not necessarily identifying solutions all over and then trying to apply those. So for me, it is not just investing in a city loosely. It is about making strategic investments that change systems and finding solutions to move forward years down the road.
And what I love about what Human Level does is we recruit and hire and fund these fellows to go into the cities and work, and they're able to work on projects that are priorities for the mayor, but that may not fit into the normal kind of staff structure of the city government. And so we're able to raise the money, fund those really talented leaders with great experience to go in and work on these big issues, systemic issues, future-looking issues, and then it doesn't have to come out of her budget, and she's able to liaise with us to tell us what she needs, to say, these are the kinds of projects I need you to work on. We work together to find the right people to do that, and it's able to have its own kind of stream of funding that can also be shared around the country, like Andre was saying, because not only do we have fellows here, we have fellows in Atlanta, we have fellows in Los Angeles, and if they're starting to think a lot about similar problems, applying them differently in different cities, they're able to reconvene with each other and share what's working. We have meetings, we have Zooms where we're all talking with each other and saying, this is really working here. How do we share that knowledge around the country to make sure more cities are doing that? And I think it's really powerful when we're able to do that. We're not only on the ground working, but we're also sharing and convening so that we can scale these solutions around the country.
Thank you. It seems like there's a really explicit focus on talent. Let's talk about that. There's many different angles one could have approached some of these issues of well-being in cities, but we've talked about really the importance of talent in this. Tell us more about whether it's the research or why did you choose to focus on the talent piece, and how do you think about talent issues, Mayor Wu? So either any of you can jump in on this.
People matter, you know, it's like, and their perspectives matter, their experience matters, their ability to lead matters, all of these things matter so much, and I feel like any organization is only as strong as the people there. And I think that's why we've been so focused on making sure talented people are recruited, hired, and incorporated into decision-making at local government. It's so important that we have really excellent people in these organizations leading, listening, doing all the things we want great leaders to do.
I would just add that maybe from my brief time at BCG also, and in different perspectives, just getting a sense of how the private sector operates versus how government and the public sector operates, one of the biggest gaps is in the investment in human capital and professional development and the sort of people themselves doing the work. And sort of theoretically it makes sense because in the public sector you're using taxpayer dollars, the needs are so urgent, you're just full on, all hands on deck trying to deliver the services, and every dollar needs to have some demonstrated impact to our residents and to our constituents. But coming into office now almost 2 years ago, right at the tail end of the pandemic, when there had been so much stress on frontline workers, yes, the healthcare workers, our first responders and city workers working all kinds of frontline jobs that needed to keep going. There was tremendous burnout, vacancies up and down, like in many other industries. And our focus was, let's make sure we have the team ready and stable and supported to be able to deliver on any announcements that are made. And so our chief of staff, Tiffany, is here somewhere as well. Tiffany is incredible and was persuaded to come from tech and the innovation sector to specifically think about building our organization in a different way than cities usually think about that. We created the first ever Office of People Operations to support and nurture our staff and aid in their professional development. And 9 times out of 10, when there's a sticky issue that needs to be solved, and for some reason it just hasn't been able to move. When you peel back all the layers, there's some administrative or human capital related situation where someone is actually being pulled, the majority of their time to this other project that feels much more urgent. Or, we had an example, this seems kind of micro, but I'd run into one of our building inspectors who shared with me on the T, actually, that the ability to respond to getting out there and checking off whether each structure was safe before the restaurant or the housing unit or whatever it is could open, there was no administrative staffer within the building inspector department. So each of the inspectors were trying to make their own schedule of how they would drive around that day. They're responding to post-it notes of people knocking on their door outside saying, when am I going to get my inspection? And the output was exponential once we realized that it was actually an organizational workforce issue of providing some support so that people could do the jobs that they wanted to do, were trained to do, but more often than not in a sort of sometimes very on your toes public sector environment, you get pulled to do whatever needs doing at that moment, and it takes resources and space to say, how do we build the best organization for it to be sustainable?
I feel like there's such a nuts and bolts nature of it. And also, I think about, we had a panel earlier in the conference about democracy and really the talent piece of making sure that government is staffed well and that systems are working for people is actually a really integral part of making our democracy work for us. Andre, any thoughts to add?
No, only thing I can add, and I learned this from my work in housing discrimination, that you have to do three things to truly develop communities, in my opinion. You have to invest in people, you have to invest in place, and you have to divest from racism. And let me explain. Oftentimes we invest in place. We invest in brick and mortar or even systems. The problem with that is if you completely invest in that, people can't keep pace with the rising prices that come along with those things. So you have to invest in people, and trust me when I say, people in city governments are devalued. We almost, anything public nowadays, we speak of as something's wrong. And when in fact, it's the city governments that are really the bloodline of our communities. So we got to invest in the people. We must invest in place. That's why we focus on cities. And we want to focus on housing and neighborhoods and things like that. But it can't come at the expense of people. We got to find talent, and we got to invest and develop talent. And then finally, you got to divest from systems that are keeping us from finding talent, from growing communities. My favorite quote in all the world comes from Thich Thich Nhat, Vietnamese philosopher, who once said, if you're growing a head of lettuce and the lettuce isn't growing, you don't blame the lettuce, right? You look to see if the soil's enriched. You look to see if it's getting sunlight, if it's getting rainwater. You don't blame the lettuce. Oftentimes, when we're trying to solve problems, all we do is blame the lettuce. We say, what's wrong with you, right? And so for me, nothing grows without investment. We have to invest in people. And that's where we move the needle.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so much of my impetus for starting Human Level was thinking about justice, thinking about what was going on in the country at the time when we found it, which was the so-called racial reckoning around George Floyd, and we were in the middle of the pandemic, and so much of the conversation was about, defund the police or not defund the police or this or that, but what was being missed in the conversation, and I think kind of intentionally, what was being missed in the conversation was that most activists were not just saying, take money away from the police, they were saying, invest in our community. Right. Invest in our community and invest in things that are uplifting and building up the community and making us safer and flourish and healthier and happier, and crime will go down if we do all those things. And so a lot of my impetus for starting Human Level and focusing on this kind of work was thinking about how do we invest in these communities in ways that actually will lead to better lives for everybody and lead us away from punitive solutions, lead us away from carceral solutions and into flourishing solutions where people have hope and they have opportunity, have a good education, have a good place to live, have all the things that we know it takes to live a happy, healthy life. Let's invest in those things, and we'll reduce all those problems we're worried about in the meantime, and let's focus on investing in people.
Because at the end of the day, people know exactly, communities know exactly what they need, right? The lettuce knows what it needs. It just needs that extra support to carry it out. But when we think about so let's just take public safety, for example. Of course, there are the kind of traditional things that every city has to run and the ways in which we have to make sure all the laws are followed and this and that. But what Boston has been doing is really trying to bring community into every facet of that. We went through the data and looked, and it turns out that in the city of Boston, 5% of the street segments, just blocks, are where more than 75% of shootings occur. So the concentration of trauma, repeated trauma on our community members, of need, and it turns out when you go to those places, you look around and often the bushes are overgrown or the street lights are out, and there are a lot of environmental factors that the city should be doing separate from the police department that directly invest in safety. But this summer, what we did also was created a block party grant. And for those communities identified as our opportunity zones, put those funds directly in the hands of community organizations to host whatever kind of activation event throughout the summer that they knew would be best for their community. And we saw a real impact from that. And it's just one more sign of if you just empower people with what they need, the lettuce is going to do its own thing.
That's right.
Wonderful. I'm going to actually open it up for questions now, and then I'm going to ask a final question myself at the end. So if you have a question for the panel, please raise your hand, and I'll call on you. We have mic runners available, and I'm sorry if you're behind this podium. Questions for the group? Yes, over here. A mic is coming to you.
Hi. I wish I had pre-formulated this question before I got the mic, so excuse any whatever. I know Cambridge is doing a really big universal basic income pilot, and I'm just wondering, for those of you who are not native here, Cambridge is a neighboring city, and I'm just wondering, we're putting so much money into a lot of programs that help social ills, right? Like food pantries, but we already have a very good food distribution system through grocery stores. So if you just gave people money, they could do that. So I'm just wondering, how much of a consideration is universal basic income on the city level? Is it just there's not political will? Is it not a topic you're talking about? Or is that actually something you're considering?
Go ahead, I'll jump in. Okay. In Boston, it's been an ongoing topic of conversation because we know it works. Chelsea, many neighboring cities in the area, Chelsea, for example, underwent a pretty significant UBI pilot with some folks in the room, and we know exactly what happens. People are healthier, they're more supported, they're happier, they're able to fulfill all the needs in their lives with just a little bit of peace of mind added to it all. What I have been struggling with when it comes to universal basic income is not the concept or the effectiveness of it, but how at the local level do we get to the scale where it can be sustainable and impact more than just a pilot program of, say, 20 families or even 100 families. All of the programs in the area, we've seen a small batch of several dozen families for a set period of time, and then it eventually goes away. And of course, for those families, for those 2 years or however long it went, that was life-changing. But how do we start to take some of the findings from all of the UBI pilots around the country in different cities and start to build something that's actually scalable and not just waiting to be sort of the rug pulled out from under people? So that's what we've been trying to think about. Is it framed Some of the programs we've been working on are more about removing barriers for infrastructure that touches everyone, whether it's the free bus lines, putting our city dollars in so that multiple of the highest, well now especially they're the highest ridership bus lines in the city serving low-income communities, communities of color, are free and accessible, and studying and grabbing the data from that, or thinking about even how to improve and subsidize transportation in other ways for families, or create pipelines around housing. But I would love to have the brain trusts of this room help think through what is scalable at a municipal level that we can incorporate and could be part of the infrastructure, not just one more small experiment.
May I add to that?
Yes, please.
Income is the workhorse for a lot of things, for longevity and well-being. What I think is the bigger problem, we need a much more robust social safety net so that it's not just income that is driving outcomes. That we do need people to be able to go to college that is subsidized to some level. We do need, Massachusetts leading the way in this regard, health care that really minimizes costs. The way that people are living now, if they don't make a certain income, then they don't have the social supports to hold them. So this is another opportunity for philanthropy to sort of incubate ideas that not just putting all your eggs into one basket, but really trying to find a new portfolio of goods that can support income, so that if you were working in the service industry, you still can have great life outcomes. But right now we put all on income, and we don't just live in our jobs. We live in a much more robust way. So I'm a big supporter of UBI, but I'm also a big supporter of free college. I'm also a supporter of healthcare. I'm also a supporter of single-payer healthcare system. I'm also supportive of a lot of things, because at some point we need a different social safety net.
It just costs too much to live here. and if you go to other rich nations, like, no one's requiring this level of debt to go to college. No one's requiring this level of expenditure to get medical care. We are asking American citizens to pay for so much, and you can't support that on a working class salary. You just can't do it. And you can't afford rent in your city. Like, there's so much that is not affordable about American life, and we've got to find a way to fix that.
Thank you. Next question. Right here, in the glasses, with the glasses. Yep.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Sonora. I'm from Native Ways Federation, a national nonprofit focused on increasing giving to Native organizations across the country.
Yep.
So about 70% of Native people live in urban areas. Right. And I'm wondering from your experiences, what your experience is with working with Native communities in urban spaces, and what recommendations you may have for the funders in the room and stakeholders in the room for working with Native communities.
May I take a stab at that? Yeah. So one of the wrinkles of this partnership that we're working on will be oversampling communities of all kinds. Again, this is cuts across race and place. And so we'll be able to oversample tribal nations, different communities, small places, larger places where there's an underrepresented population in them. And so part of this effort is to really expand our sense of well-being among populations that are not typically reported in the census. We also have scholars. One of my colleagues, Rob Maxim, is part of our effort. He works specifically on Native populations, and the big picture there is that we've got to change the way the census collects and manages data. You can give that a round of applause. Because, there is a level of distrust with all government but particularly when you're collecting information because people feel that they're going to be surveilled or they're going to be punished. And so part of, I think, with this well-being work, what we're really trying to do is say, hey, we're going to ask you how you're doing. But more importantly, we want to get a sense of what's going right in your community so we can adopt them in other areas. So we are going to oversample in areas that will specifically include Native populations just as a start, because ultimately we want to change systems too, and we want to get the census to be able to collect data in a way that honors political communities. Because remember, you know, a lot of folks see Native American as a race. It's not necessarily a race, it's a political affiliation. However, that we have got to work with tribes all across, and Native indigenous folks and folks who identify as Native in ways that we can get the information so that we can see how they are doing.
If you haven't guessed it yet, my theory of delivering change is that if you want something to happen in city government, everything is possible, but you need someone who is responsible for it and who is thinking about it all the time and therefore coordinating all the other parts that are needed, but also accountable. And so we have been able to invest in a position for the first time within city government specifically dedicated to, it's called our Serving Indigenous Communities Fellow. And Amira's amazing, and she's been able to help make those connections and focus, give the space and time to listen, to understand all the ways in which our structural challenges that affect everyone uniquely and disproportionately impact Native peoples, but also then to surface some of the other things that city government can do something about as well. So just very recently, the issue of being able to hold ceremonial fires was raised to our attention. The Boston Fire Department is notorious for doing a good job, and that can often mean they have a pretty high barrier for anything and everything to happen. And so that was expressly prohibited, any kind of ceremonial fires in certain locations. And so we've been working with the fire department directly and local organizations through Amira and her team to ensure that we could make that possible as one more small way of being able to recognize and support the visibility of our community members, of cultural practices and sacred and spiritual practices that are really important for maintaining community here in the city as well.
Great. Thank you. It's certainly another tie to the importance of talent and also connecting with communities. I'm going to take one last audience question before I have a closing question. Mickey.
Hi, my name is Mickey Levitan. I'm a visiting fellow at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And this is a question that's mostly for John. We have you on our playlists. You're in our living room every week.
Thank you.
We watch The Voice. And now it's really wonderful to hear about your work on the philanthropy side, another reason to appreciate you. My question is around celebrity philanthropy and whether you see a role for yourself. I know there are a lot of celebrities who are very active in philanthropy, but there are always new ones coming up and trying to figure out their way. Do you see a role for yourself in helping to mobilize and also maybe to inform others who are interested in making contributions related to the one you're making?
Yes, I do see a role, and I start from the foundation of always looking up to artists who saw their mission as more than just creating great art, but actually speaking to what's going on in the world, actually, doing like Harry Belafonte did, and using their funds to go support the civil rights movement, doing what Mahalia Jackson did, using her money and her voice to inspire Dr. King, doing what Marvin Gaye did and taking a break from making romantic music and music about sexual healing and speaking out about the war that was going on in the world at that moment. And so I think I've always looked at an artist's role as not just going out there to entertain people and make money, but to use my influence to be like those artists that inspired me to try to make the world better. When I was 15 years old, I entered an essay competition sponsored by McDonald's, and it was called Black History Makers of Tomorrow. And the question was simple. It was like, how do you plan to make Black history? And I said, I'm going to become a famous recording artist, and I'm going to use my success to give back and make a difference in my community. And so I've been trying to live that aspiration that I have for myself and that vision I have for myself since then, and I feel very fortunate that those aspirations have come to fruition and come true in my life. And so a lot of other artists will approach me about how they can do something and how they can get involved. And part of it is, you know, we have resources, we make a lot of money doing what we do. Give some of it away. Give a good portion of it away. But also be smart about, you know, how you give and really pay attention to these issues, learn about them. I have a team that supports my philanthropy. They study the issues, they talk to activists, they work with so many stakeholders to make sure we're really being smart about the issues that we care about and trying to really solve them and listen to people who are most acutely affected by them. And so I tell everyone that asks me about how they can do the kind of work that we're doing, you really have to be willing to listen and learn and think about effectiveness and think about whether the money you're putting in and the attention you're putting toward an issue is really going to make a difference. And so that's another thing. And then I think we all have to be humble because even though we're really good at what we do, there are other people who are really smart and really good at what they do, and we need to be good at listening to them, learning from them, and empowering them to do what they do really well.
Thank you. In the remaining couple minutes, I wanted to just close with this question. I know many of us are holding a lot of heaviness and grief with the state of the world these days. I'm wondering, what is something that is giving you hope these days?
Well, you know, there's lots that gives me hope. I'm always looking to borrow from Mr. Rogers, looking for the doers of the world, the helpers. And in this time, it's almost impossible to get people to understand because of if you're directly involved in a war or a particular issue, because there's so much passion involved. But for the rest of us, we do need words of healing. We do need to hear how people are helping. You know, I don't, it's a shame, but I've been listening to recordings almost from like 60, 70 years ago, either from Gandhi or from Martin Luther King Jr., because I just need that moral framing. Because I do believe these are tough times, and I'm not going to tell you how to feel. With that said, I do believe that there are people out there that we need to recognize as helping. And we put way too much, we put microphones in front of people who they are just built to be destructive. And I just, you know, I want to hear from people who are helping, doing, changing. So that's, you know, so I do get help, because I've tuned out of people who just don't want to listen. I mean, I'm just tuned out. So I'm listening to folks who are saying, hey, here's how we should live. So yeah.
Wonderful. John?
What gives me hope is, this is going to sound corny, but I really believe that music and art have a way of connecting us and making us see each other's like universal humanity that transcends all these boundaries of like religion and nationality. And I just know from experience of traveling around the world and singing that it's a way of breaking these barriers down and allowing us to like just see each other, experience love together, experience each other's humanity. And I believe the more that we are able to do that, the more we're able to just see each other as human beings and value each other's lives in that way. And I really believe art and music help us do that. The more we're able to do that, the better off we'll be. And the fact that I see it in practice in my travels around the world makes me hopeful.
I feel very lucky every day to have many moments of hope and to see the hunger that people have to be together in community after what we've all experienced collectively through the pandemic and what we're seeing now. Just yesterday, I had a couple reminders of the difference that one person can make for just 1 hour of their time. We were very blessed that Jason Tatum came and spent some time at one of our local high schools to celebrate the high attendance that the students had throughout from the beginning of the year to now, and the spirit and just how well they're doing this school year. And I was passing out candy later that night, and there were lots and lots of kids who came through, and a few times the really terrifying costumes of high school students, bloody, wrapped up, and they would take off the mask and say, "I saw you earlier at my school, that was so fun," right? And then put it back on. And to know that those young people feel seen, and they feel they're gonna carry that excitement and inspiration with them for the rest of the school year. They're talking to everyone, and we each can give so much and just plant those seeds that, I'm not gonna keep going back to lettuce, even though I really want to. That can...
This lettuce gotta grow.
Let's say put the pebbles in the water that can ripple out. And it just, we're so, especially at the local level, we're so interconnected, and the impact in one small place immediately can be felt right nearby. So just every bit makes a difference, and we really experience that at the city level every day.
Thank you. With that, join me in thanking Andre, John, and Mayor Wu. Sure.